Abbey Road by the Beatles is one of the best-selling albums ever, with a mind-blowing 30 million copies sold, but honestly, I have no idea how it sold that much. Here's the thing, when you take a look at some of the best-selling albums of all time, you'll either find compilations, albums with a bunch of singles on it, the soundtrack of a popular movie, or albums that had a major cultural impact. And let's be honest here, Abbey Road is none of those. There's no major movement behind it. Of course, this is one of the greatest albums of all time. In terms of overall quality, actually, this might be the best album of the greatest discography ever, but when it comes to sales, quality's not enough. Let's take a look at Sgt. Pepper, for example, an album that has a similar amount of sales. This album represented a massive change of sound and image for the Beatles. You had costumes, promotional films, and a whole story about this being a new beginning for the band. Then there's The Time. 1967 was the peak of the psychedelic movement, and this album featured some of the most polished examples of that sound. The almost 30 million copies this album sold make total sense when you think about the impact of this album. But now, let's take a look at Abbey Road. Once again, incredible album, but there was little to no marketing for its release. Aside from the Come Together and Something single, and by the way, what an ugly cover, there was no major publicity campaign to sell it. Then we have the year. 1969 was an amazing year for music, but a big part of that was thanks to the ambiguity of the time. There was such a variety of genres, and the Beatles were through with their psychedelic phase. The boys did innovate quite a bit in this album with the use of synths and adding elements of progressive rock and things like the medley, but that's pretty much it. Actually, when you look back on it, the release of this album was a little underwhelming. Let me remind you that Let It Be had a whole film made about it, and a return to live performances. Instead, this one was like, hey, I'm here. I've seen some people say that the album cover had a lot to do with it, and yeah, that makes sense. Even if I didn't like the album, I would probably still buy it just so I can have it in my living room to remind myself how cultured and cool I am. But aside from that, the fact that this album sold 30 million copies makes absolutely no sense in my opinion.